Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hop-Ons podcast, a community review podcast sponsored by our Patreon supporters. My name is Colin Cox.
My name is John Phelps. Colin, good evening. How are you?
Hey, buddy.
I'm a lot more somber in tonage tonight.
Oh,
because I don't want to go ahead and say I'm bringing back the word stinker for tonight's episode, but
oh no,
could be working its way into.
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
That territory, but
maybe.
Just saying.
He's just saying. I understand.
Yeah.
Well, John, so I mentioned Patreon a moment ago. Patreon, they've made some changes to their platform. I think you and I discussed this before we started, maybe attempting to fill this gap that Twitter, X, whatever, has left. So if you like our podcast and want to just follow us on Patreon without actually giving us any money, you can do that. And I think I will check the settings. I think you can maybe see posts or at the very least just have yourself affiliated with the show. You won't have access to any of the exclusive content, but if you go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/Hop-Ons Pod or Hop-Ons Podcast, you can find us. It's in the show notes. But anyway, if you like the podcast, want to find a way to follow us, show us that you like the podcast, interacting with us. I mentioned YouTube last week. That's an option. Twitter's still an option for those of you who still have a Twitter account, but this is another option. Again, the Patreon link, it is the first one in the show notes. But John Phelps, tonight we will discuss Season 5, Episode 12 of the television program Community, Basic Story. And it sounds like you think this is a basic story.
I'm not the biggest fan of this episode of television.
John, this episode of television originally aired on April the 10th, 2014, directed by J. Chandra Sekhar.
Okay.
I think
that was very good.
Thank you. Written by Carol Kolb. So I checked her IMDb page. She wrote a lot for The Onion.
Okay.
Which is interesting.
I love that. Love The Onion.
Yeah, I do too. We've spoken about this before. My favorite Onion article ever.
If we have, I don't remember it. What is it?
It's the J.D. Salinger Terminator piece.
No, I do not know this.
Okay, quickly. Anyone listening, you can find this. So J.D. Salinger, reclusive American author, wrote The Catcher in the Rye, Franny and Zoe, Raise High the Roof Beam, Carpenters, and Seymour, an introduction. After that maybe decade of popularity, again, he became this rather famous recluse, and everyone always wondered, well, what does he have that he's written over the decades when he just refused to be a part of the public? And if and when he dies, will his estate release some of that wonderful, wonderful content? And when he actually died, The Onion produced a piece suggesting that over the 30 or 40 years that he hid himself, he just wrote Terminator fan fiction.
That's so good.
Yeah, like
that's so good.
They would like excerpt some lines like "Come with me if you want to live, you goddamn phony," like that sort of thing. It's
Terminators will drive you crazy. I swear to Christ, they will.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, that's my favorite Onion piece. I wonder if Carol Kolb wrote it. I hope she did. But, John, this is your IMDb plot summary. After a liability audit, the Save Greendale Committee discovered that they have, in fact, saved Greendale until they discover that as a result of the successful audit, the school is being sold to Subway.
That's the thing. This is a thing that
John,
happens.
It certainly happens. For a bit of context,
yes.
We think this is right because the website we use, it's having some problems.
Yeah,
John, on ABC, Shark Tank at 4.4.
Oh,
we think.
The shark bites Colin.
John, did you? Okay.
Welcome back to a very infrequent fan favorite segment, Tank the Shark Tank. This is where I find the worst Shark Tank pitches known to man. Colin,
this is quick.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah, this is good.
Let me ask you a question.
Okay. Sure.
You're a vegetarian.
Mm-hmm.
So this would not appeal to you.
Okay.
But this is from a season 2 Shark Tank pitch, and I just want to say the words to you, and you tell me what you think it is. Okay?
Okay.
It's
Sure.
called Wake and Bacon. Now, what do you think Wake and Bacon would be?
Is it is it maybe a pork product that doubles as like pot?
So this is fucking wild. Okay, this probably would have came out after this happened, right? Do you
I
remember the
after
episode of The Office where Michael burns his foot on the George Foreman grill
I do, yeah.
because he likes to wake up and put some bacon on and then go to sleep and then wake up to the smell of
He
bacon?
likes to
That
he
is
likes the smell of
essentially
bacon.
what this is. Wake and Bacon, a wooden alarm clock that broils bacon set to the time you wake up. Not only did Matty Sallin, that's his name, Matthew Sallin, not only did Matthew Sallin not know the basics of cost production, but the clock was also a potential fire hazard. At least Sallin had the composure to leave with a smile and thank you after Shark O'Leary told him, "I'm going to put that in my museum of really bad ideas that kill people." A wooden alarm clock. First off, why are you making a wooden cooking device? Is the first thing I'd have
John,
to say.
that's yeah, I mean the so it's wooden but electric as well?
It's an electric wooden.
That's a
Okay.
bad idea. That's a really bad idea.
And he only wanted $40,000. So maybe he's out there somewhere chasing his dream. I would guarantee you that this man saw that episode of The Office and thought, now there's
I
an
can
idea.
make this happen.
That's an
I can
idea.
make this happen. Yeah. Yeah,
Boy, oh
without
boy.
realizing without see this is one of those times where one must ask oneself, does the average audience member understand maybe how satire works? Because The Office, I think, especially in early episodes, established one should not emulate Michael Scott. If Michael has an idea, you should probably do the complete
Do the
opposite,
opposite.
right? And
Absolutely. Yes.
that's part of the joke is as the person with the most power and control, one would think at least more often than not he would have the best ideas, but he often had the worst ideas. But John, I like that someone watched this and thought, even after like
Yeah.
John watching the episode and seeing how poorly this works for Michael, thinking, I can perfect this. What I need to do is make it out of wood.
Yeah.
Sure, it increases the risk of a fire hazard, but aesthetically it looks beautiful because I mean a George Foreman grill, I'm sorry, it's just not the most aesthetically
Yeah,
pleasing
it's too
device.
futuristic, too alienist. So
Yeah,
now we have to
yeah,
get something that
so
looks. And it was carved to look like a cartoon pig. So God bless you,
what?
Wake and Bacon
No.
Man. Jesus
Okay.
God Almighty. Anyway, Colin, that is
John,
ABC, and we think they had a what 4 point something maybe.
4.4. Yeah.
All right, the big winners, of course.
John, the big winner on CBS, The Big Bang Theory at 10, we think.
Yeah, we think.
John, on Fox, Hell's Kitchen at 2.6, we think.
We think. And Colin, let's just hop over into Community Land. What do we hit this night?
Sure, on NBC Community at 1.7, we think.
And that is point one above where it was on the much better last episode. Colin, this is an episode of TV. That is my review for the episode Basic
Okay.
Story from Community. This
It's an
certainly
episode
was
of
television.
Yeah, yeah, sure. It meets a lot of those rudimentary requirements. Like it appeared on TV.
Yeah.
It's approximately 22 minutes, I suppose 30 if you include commercials.
That's about it.
So, John-
yeah. So thank you so
well,
much for
okay.
listening, everybody. I appreciate it. No, I guess we have to talk about it. We have to talk about it.
I mean, I would like to talk about it. I think there are some interesting things about this episode. But John, what is it? What did you not like here?
Almost everything. I think the episode itself is like it's first off, it's very packed full of things, and
Lots of
to a
things.
ridiculous degree.
Hmm.
You can almost feel the panic in the episode when I'm assuming outside of the scope of the show, they realize that this is going to be it for them on NBC. I would
Huh.
imagine.
Okay.
I think you can feel that sort of sinking in, the dread of what are we going to do next. If you take a step back, I think they're very there are things to look at that I find to be very interesting that are not within the show itself, but more on, is this a commentary piece, much like season 3 of Arrested Development, where they're trying to sell the, like, like they're doing the Burger King thing, they're mentioning
Yeah.
HBO and Showtime. I'm wondering if that's kind of what's happening here. Like,
Hmm.
maybe we need a big sponsor, so we do the Subway thing. I don't know,
Yeah.
but that
And it's not like
is
Subway's new to this show,
right. They're
right? I
not.
mean, yeah.
Maybe that's sort of happening. They're poking fun at this idea of NBC not giving them anything. There's even a line
Hmm.
where the dean's like, "If we only had more time, I could try harder." Things along those
Yeah,
lines. So
that's really
it's
good.
hard
Yeah.
not to look and see that they're really talking about the actual show being made.
Yeah.
Um, I just found it to be particularly boring. I didn't think there was a
Hmm.
lot happening that I liked. The Jeff and Britta stuff made me roll my eyes towards the back of my head. I thought it was so bad, and I didn't
Yeah.
like it. The Abed stuff I find to be kind of interesting, but I think the Dean really carries this episode as best he can. That's just my thoughts.
So let's talk about the Jeff and Britta situation. After the next episode, I want us to return to this conversation because Abed and Annie, John, they have a conversation about this. And I think it contextualizes this move in an interesting way. What Abed basically argues, John, is, and this is another one of those moments where it feels like the show wants to actively comment on, as you suggested, the inevitability of this being the end. Because Abed says, and he frames it as if they are two characters in a show who they know are getting canceled, and they say it's natural for them to try and spin off. And he even starts like
Okay,
pitching what this Jeff Britta spinoff would be.
sure.
So I'm actually persuaded by that framing that what this ultimately is, and you can actually see it maybe from the urgency of Jeff's declaration to even the way Britta responds to it when she says something like, "Yeah, this feels right." All of this feels expedited and uncertain, and I think that's part of the point. And again, I think Abed, his commentary retroactively justifies what happens in this episode, so perhaps we can wait for that. I agree with you. I think, and it's right there in the title, right? There's a lot about this episode that I want to discuss regarding not just sitcom storytelling, but John, specifically, and I'm glad you mentioned The Office earlier because we can use that as an interesting comparison. The potential problems with the American sitcom aesthetic, because I think this episode maybe offers an interesting thesis, especially when thinking about the way this episode wants to comment on conflict and why perhaps so many American sitcoms start in so many interesting places. But I think the term we often use is jumping the shark. But I want to talk about that a bit because I think what this episode wants to suggest is because of American sitcom sensibilities, there's this move toward eradicating conflict and making characters' lives better, which has the effect of eradicating conflict. And as Abed suggests, and this is such a profoundly important principle, without conflict, stories cannot exist. So I want to talk about that more, and I want to have a conversation about American sitcoms and the American sitcom aesthetic. But I guess as just a person who spends most of his days talking to students about stories, discussing storytelling structure, really encouraging them to embrace this idea that so much of just our conscious existence is the crafting of narrative. I've always really liked this episode, but I think there's something potentially impenetrable about it if you're not someone who likes those kinds of conversations and has those kinds of thoughts in the way that I do. And I think even like there's something near the end of the next season, John, that I think you'll really like, where a character says something like, some episodes are too conceptual to be enjoyed. And I think you could maybe level that criticism at this Abed narrative. It's too conceptually ambitious to really be enjoyable. Like in the same way that like concept cars are too conceptually interesting for anyone to ever drive them on the road. We have to like iterate from them. But I understand what you mean, especially not, and I think this is one of those moments where you didn't do anything wrong, but I think not having watched the next episode, a lot of this episode is deeply frustrating in the way that I suppose all cliffhangers are, because that's exactly what this is, right?
Yeah, yeah. It is a two-parter, which we probably should have started out with saying it is the penultimate episode of, I guess at the time they're thinking is the actual show itself.
Maybe,
And
yeah.
so I think also in that regard, it's not. And I was actually, I applauded it for not being too like emotionally heft. There wasn't like a lot of emotional heft in that, like something we would have seen maybe in previous episodes, which I really am glad they didn't do. I think you can see in this season that they were just happy that they got another season. That's all. That's how I felt the whole time watching this. Like
That's good,
let's don't take this for granted and sort of do the silliest things we can with it. And I think that's maybe where my criticisms come in, is that there's so much silliness in the episode that I couldn't grasp onto anything that I really cared about. It is an episode that is breakneck in its pacing. No, there's not a moment to breathe, a moment to slow down. Even the stuff with Jeff and Britta, when they have this realization of we should get married, that's a scene that's probably 3 minutes, if that. Mm-hmm. And then that's the longest scene I would think in the whole fucking episode. Then that's immediately trampled over by Abed and the Dean and Annie coming in with this insane chanting of buried treasure.
It's pretty wild. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think there's nothing for me to hang my hat on and really like get behind in this episode. And I shouldn't say that I think it's a stinker. It's not. I mean, it's an enjoyable episode. There are funny jokes in it, but coming off the heels of, and no fault of its own, it came off the heels of an episode I truly loved. I think that just puts it in a bad light for me from the outset.
And I suppose the irony is an episode that seems at times, and characters just say this explicitly, an episode that seems to have so little story. I totally agree with you. It's almost frenetic in its development of so many different stories, right? And I think that's one of those interesting moments, John, where it's clear that we as the audience experience something that characters in this episode don't. And that is, I would argue, maybe a rare sensation when something feels so frenetic to us, but maybe you could argue it doesn't feel that way to characters in the story. But I think let us begin perhaps with Abed. And I think what you said about the last episode and how much you really enjoyed it, this Jeff-centric episode where Jeff has an obvious crisis of some kind. It's interesting because this episode begins with Abed maybe having a bit of a crisis of some kind. And I was wondering, do you think, is this searching, this insistence on finding a story, is this a moment of regression for Abed? Is it an extension of the previous episode? Because I said this, I think, in the last episode and the one before, that these final couple of episodes really seem to want to have this protracted conversation about sitcom storytelling. And that's exactly where we start here, with Abed experiencing anxiety because he's waiting for the story to begin,
Yeah.
And so I was curious if you have thoughts about how Abed seems at the beginning of this episode.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I wouldn't call it a regression. He's a character to me that, especially in this episode, I think he is. When I watched it, I never had any sort of not sympathy for him, but I never felt empathy for him because he's right, and I knew he was going to be right, and
Okay.
I think that, to me, makes Abed feel like the smartest guy in the room. And that like takes away any type of like regression he might have, because Abed gets the stakes. Abed understands what's happening, which is why I loved him in the last episode, is that he, more than anyone, was able to say, this is happening, don't worry, we're going to be fine. And here Abed even like, for that brief second of worrying, okay, you guys are playing on your phone, what is this, what are we doing? We've accomplished all the things to make Greendale make Greendale great again. We've accomplished all these things. Um, where do we go from here? But I think even though he's teetering on being completely spastic and insane, I think he's a character that always in the back of his mind knows, oh, this is going to lead somewhere. I don't have to worry about this.
Yeah,
Because
and I think
it's
this is
not.
one of
It's
those.
like it's like your Seinfelds, with a show that is quote unquote about nothing. A whole lot of fucking crazy shit happens in Seinfeld, And
Yeah,
even though if it's a show about nothing, the stories are so wild and crazy that in the end maybe nothing mattered, but there's a lot that got you there.
yeah, and I think about, I mean, a show like Seinfeld, when you'll remember this, when this person breaks up with Jerry and he's not upset at all, and he says, "Meh, someone else will come.
So good,
There will
yeah,
always be someone else."
yeah,
And in those moments, he feels a lot like Abed, does he not? Like, there will always be another conflict, another story. I just need to wait, and a story will find me. What I think is interesting about Abed here, a couple of things, John. I that was great what you said. In his attempt to not find a story, he has his own arc in this episode, which again, I think part of that, just saying it aloud, that's part of what makes it seem a bit impenetrable. Maybe is the idea that Abed's narrative arc is his pursuit of a non-narrative, but also, and again, this is, I think, is where form is really important. Think about all the times in previous seasons and episodes when Abed has had a crisis. The episode itself and all of the other characters have like bent, I suppose, to that anxiety. That's not what happens here at all. If you think about the Christmas episode, for example, there's no sense that this is a crisis that anyone is, to be quite frank, concerned about at all. And I think that's part of what, when you were describing how you were watching it but thinking the whole time everything will be fine. I think part of that as well, it's quite frankly because no one else was concerned about this at all. I mean, everyone else was concerned about this other thing. And so it's just Abed off by himself, which, again, if it were a real crisis, one would expect at least one other person in the study, one other person in the study group to care. But no one else really seems to care about this.
yeah. I don't disagree with you, but at the same time, like, you have to see that at this point, like, Abed has solved it. Abed solves the show. There's a moment in like the beginning of Act 3 where they're trying to figure out a way to get, I guess, to get money, to get something to
Mhm.
buy Subway, to get the school back from Subway. And Abed out loud says buried treasure. And so Abed at that
He
point
does,
has like
yeah.
solved the show because he wills that into the story's existence. He's the person who brings that into the show. And nobody else is going to say that. And there's probably a strong moment if Abed doesn't say that. He never ends up in the dean's office. He never looks behind this picture and finds literal buried treasure. Like, Abed wills this because Abed he solved it. He solved the sitcom. That's what we saw happening in the last episode. Abed solved it. He's like, don't worry, I've solved it. I know what we go from here. And here
Yeah.
he's just like experimenting more with that. The show is saying, yeah, Abed gets it. Just listen to Abed. That's what I felt from this.
Yeah, that's really interesting, John, because I think we've had these conversations about how Abed is both a character, obviously, in this story, but at times he also feels like a narrator, or like he's an author insert. And when he declares something, that's what moves the narrative forward in some
Sure.
ways. I mean, one of the best examples that I often use, even though I think this is, for obvious reasons, a complicated series because of the author, when you think about Harry Potter and the way Dumbledore, at least for those early, in those early books, he's really an author insert in the same way that Hermione is. And so when they say things, you can believe them and trust them because they're really surrogates for the author at that point. And Abed feels that way. And you could even describe him as a kind of plant, I suppose, that he's there, as you said, to make these declarations, to move the narrative forward. And that's incredibly fascinating because Jeff, by contrast, Jeff really feels like someone who wants to reject the idea of conflict, not necessarily because he has a problem with conflict in stories, but because it seems like Jeff just wants out of this larger narrative that Abed has forced or forced upon them or like sequestered them off into this narrative or whatever. And so like Jeff the whole time, his injunction is there's no conflict because if there's a conflict, then there's a story. And what I like about how these two characters work, because they're working at cross purposes, but they intersect at interesting moments, right? That moment at the end where Abed declares there is no conflict is, funnily enough, the moment when the conflict emerges. So you could almost imagine that Abed's like, that's another one of those moments where when he utters or declares conflict is over, that's the moment when the conflict really emerges at that point. And that's an interesting like little storytelling move where, again, Abed, he makes a declaration and something then obviously by necessity happens to move the narrative forward.
Right, yeah. And what I think is interesting, I think of if any characters has regressed, it's Jeff. I think Jeff is like,
Interesting.
especially Jeff is a character who, in moments of panic, has seemed to have a level head about him. Even in this episode at the beginning, he's like, "Stop! We're not doing any of that. We're just done. We don't have to do anything anymore." But then at the moment of the moment when panic sets in, his first thought is, "I'm gonna marry Britta." That's like the first like, let me jump to the wildest conclusion one can jump to. And that's not something we've seen from Jeff in a very, very long time.
Well, when has it ever really seemed, that's a great point, but when has it ever seemed like the story will end? Because I don't know. I think this is one of the first times. And listen, Community, we can talk about its fraught production history and everything and how. And I think the Dean says something about this in the next episode, John, that it's perpetual precarity is just part of what this show is, in the same way that with Arrested Development, right? It's defined by its precarity from a production perspective. But this, I think that's really good, John, because this feels like one of the first times when Jeff must reckon with or confront the idea that this might in fact end. And again, I think this is one of those interesting moments where we cannot trust what he says, because what he says is not what he desires. Because by marrying Britta, what do we think he's doing? He's not then introducing stability, he's introducing more conflict. And he, even if he doesn't know that, I think unconsciously he knows that. This is one of those moments where I talk about this a lot. This is one of the reasons why I like Freud and psychoanalysis, just this emphasis on you are not in full control of yourself. You have this, Freud would frame it or characterize it as this alien thing inside of you, your unconscious, that acts without your consent. But you also have obviously this conscious aspect of yourself that acts with your consent. And those two forces are constantly at war with one another. So consciously, Jeff says, there's no conflict, there's no story, I want all of this to end, it'll be nice, it'll be relaxing, etc. But John, the moment when he has an opportunity to actually have that, what does he do? He defers it by suggesting, Britta, you and I should get married. Is that not just a moment where he's deferring what he thinks he wants? Because what he really wants is the thing that Abed has suggested they all need the whole episode, which is conflict, which is story, which is agitation, which is what we all want.
So then by that, just do you think that there is this subconscious where, like, Jeff also realizes he's in a show?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think what I can say is when Jeff says he just wants things to be, I don't know, does he use the word calm? I'm
Yeah,
editorializing, but I think
sure.
what he basically means is he wants things to be less manic than they are. That's not what he wants. What he really wants is conflict. What he really wants is agitation. And I don't necessarily know because, like, you and I are not in a show, but we do things all the time to sustain a kind of agitation. We do this, I mean, if we didn't, I mean, this is, again, the basic, like, simple Freudian point. If we didn't want agitation, we quite literally wouldn't interact with people. We would just stop. Like, the idea that you even leave your home and interact with people suggests the need or desire for agitation, for a kind of provocation. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Jeff says he doesn't want this, but I think, unconsciously, of course he does. He has that, we all have that drive for that
Man,
agitation, for that
that's boy, oh
provocation.
boy, not
Yeah.
leaving the house, stealing people. That's the dream. That's you've said the dream out loud, Colin. That's the
See, but that's not, is it really the dream though? I
yes,
don't know.
abso-fucking-lutely. 100%, baby.
Well, now I guess it's a little different considering the way we can communicate digitally. One can still be in one's house and, you know, experience provocation and agitation. So, perhaps.
Perhaps. Well, I think it's fascinating because I'm always comparing a show ending like this to a show like Arrested Development. And in
Mhm.
Arrested Development, like those characters were so full of vitriol for their network. Like you could just tell. They just fucking hated. They hated Fox. They hated what Fox had done to them. And everything was just an attack on look what you've done to ruin our show. Apart from the Mr. F stuff, throw that out because it's not the best. But all the other stuff about
It's
trying
not
to find a
great.
place for the company to land is so good. And I think about that versus like this is so much more. There's so much more emotional heft to this because Community is Arrested Development was a show that focused on characters, but also focused on commentating on how ridiculous really the Bush family was. Like that's what Arrested
Yeah.
Development was.
Yeah.
And Community is a lot more of these characters that we are focusing on, and it's character centric and character driven. And I think it's interesting to see these two shows ending. Like it feels like Community is in way more of a panic than Arrested Development ever was. Arrested Development was just like, let's throw out some feelers and see what happens, and if it ends, it ends. But here it just seems like they really don't want it to end, and yeah, it's just interesting. It's just an interesting thing I see.
Yeah, and like there's this sense in Arrested Development, especially if you think about a character like Michael who always threatens to leave. The threat of all of that ending, it's so omnipresent with Arrested Development. But as we've discussed, like the one thing Michael maybe unconsciously does not want to do is leave all of
Right,
this
right, right.
for the same reasons why I don't think Jeff, despite what he says, really wants to leave all of this. But I agree with you. There is this, and like, John, I don't know, maybe because Britta and Jeff have this interesting conversation about Annie and Abed. And again, I think we should reject this premise that somehow Britta and Jeff are different from them. But they have this conversation about how they're much younger and they do not know how to process the loss of this. And I wonder if that's part of it too. Because when I think about the characters in Arrested Development, obviously all of those family members are much older. They're not too terribly older if we're just thinking about the characters, right? Like Job, I think at the end of season 3 is what, late 30s
Yeah,
maybe, right?
yeah,
Michael's in his mid 30s. They're not that much older. They're basically contemporaries with Jeff, but they are what, 10 maybe 15 years older than characters like Annie and Abed. And I wonder if that's part of it too, is in Arrested Development these characters are just so tired of one another. That's
yeah,
maybe why. And I think like that's one of the times where Hurwitz allows the sensibilities and the sentiment of this family to really infect tonally the way the show feels to us, the way we might receive it. I think with Community, and also John, I think part of it as well is Community is a show about these characters finding one another. Arrested Development is very much a show about these characters stuck with one another, and I think just that dynamic also creates just a different feeling, a different sensibility. And so I don't know what you think about that, but that's maybe what I would say is why, because these people found each other, they chose each other. Michael did not choose his family, even though I think you could argue he's always choosing them. He just doesn't think of it that way.
Yeah, I look at it like, and I agree with you completely. Like, a Community is a show where, at the end of it, everyone's going to be somber that we have to leave this building, this study group, this library, this room, all these things. Whereas in Arrested Development, you were always in on the joke. Like, you were always in on, okay, we're all together as a group making fun of this corporation that is ruining this show for us. And I think that that's the difference. Is there's always there's a streak of meanness in Arrested Development that we all just love to be a part of. You just love to get in on that. When Barry and Tobias are eating at Burger King, or no, not Barry and Tobias. Tobias and Carl Weathers are eating at Burger King,
because they're filming Scandal Makers,
right? Which is great, and we're in on this idea of, literally in the show pitching to advertisers about how good Burger King is. We're always there. We're always in on it, and so there's no any time that you feel sympathy or sadness for this, because we're all just making fun together. And I think with Community, the characters are slowly realizing that this is a sad moment. This is not a moment where we can join together and poke fun at the big bear that is NBC. We've been given an extra 13 episodes to be together, an extra, half a year to actually come together again as a group. And I think there's a difference there. And with most sitcoms, I think Arrested Development is very far away from how most things end. I think Arrested Development and Seinfeld probably fit in their own box together as shows that were ready to go. But The Office, The Office has a bit of finality to it, but you still, I think, have a bit of sadness leaving, like Community does. I don't know. It's interesting.
And if we also this is more paratextual, I suppose. If we're thinking about shows on NBC, well, first, making jokes about NBC, that it's NBC at this point. We've spoken about their ratings and their numbers, but to be quite frank with you, it feels like 30 Rock has really colonized that territory, right? If you think about how often 30 Rock makes jokes about NBC, because the show within that show, it airs on NBC. So I think that's part of it as well, John, is I guess Community could make those jokes, but it feels like 30 Rock has said everything anyone could and needs to say about NBC and their inability to either find viewers, generate ratings, advertise their shows, etc. But I also think just I like your point about attitude in particular, because I think you're right. There was always something so cynical, it seems, about Arrested Development, and I think we always like that about the show. It's at times a very cynical show. Community feels more aspirational. It feels more saccharine, I guess. So if it were, and this is why I think Jeff has always felt like a character who he could be blah blah blah, I suppose. He feels like a character who's better suited for Arrested Development, and I think that's part of what makes him such an interesting figure in this group, is seeing maybe the innocence of this show have a kind of profound effect on him, it seems. It shifted him and moved him and changed him in interesting ways. But I think that's part of it too. If Community became incredibly cynical at this point, it, I guess it would almost feel like they're just attempting to ape Arrested Development or do
Sure.
that thing that I suppose a lot of us do, right? Like someone fires you and you say, you cannot fire me, I quit, right? Like that feels
Right.
very cynical instead of just accepting the fact that someone terminated your job or your position. But John, I think that affords us an opportunity maybe to talk a little bit about American sitcom storytelling sensibilities because, and I think this whole idea about fixing Greendale, it feels like what the show's suggesting or communicating is to fix Greendale is to remove all of this conflict that, as Abed suggests, really drives these narratives. And in that way, it feels like a lot of American sitcom television is aspirational in that same direction. And I guess that is to say, what we often see with American sitcoms are from season to season narrative arcs where characters actively become better versions of themselves, situations improve, so on and so forth, etc. Therefore, I think you could argue so many American sitcoms, they must end because the aesthetic expectation is for conflict to disappear. And I think this is part of maybe because if we want to imagine this episode wants to offer a kind of commentary on storytelling, maybe specifically American sitcom storytelling, I think, sure, we always need conflict, but as sitcoms progress from one season to the next, I think about, for example, a show like Friends and how as their lives continue to improve, the necessity of conflict, it's obviously there, but it becomes harder to find it.
Yeah.
It's really easy in those opening seasons of Friends because they're all young, maybe a bit confused, socially and economically isolated and disadvantaged. Not all of them, but some of them. And of course, they're all like white people in New York in the 90s. But the show, I guess the point is, the show wants us to think, as the theme song suggests, that, you know, it hasn't been their day, John, their week, or their month, or my God, even their year.
Or their year. Yeah, fascinating.
Or their year, which is a long time. I mean, a day's not that long, but a year, my God. But as the show progresses, of course, as characters' lives improve,
Yeah.
as I think audiences expect, it becomes harder and harder to find those conflicts. And I think that's why shows need to end at some point, because it's like, what's the conflict, right? Was I don't know, the latte foam not good enough for Chandler by season 12, right? It's just I don't know. I guess my point is this drive toward eradicating conflict feels like something unique to American sitcoms that we don't see, for example, from the British Office, for example, which is maybe one of the reasons why that show feels the way it does as long as it does, because there's no sense that these characters, their lives and situations need to necessarily improve.
Yeah.
But I think I just like that. I like that. What I would argue is that bit of commentary about what American sitcoms do to stories and that need for things to just continue progressively to get better.
I think that's what I've always found fascinating about British shows. One of my favorite shows when I was growing up was Fawlty Towers, and
Sure.
it used to come on PBS at like 2 a.m., and I would record it on VHS. And when I got older, I bought it on DVD, not knowing that there's like 10 episodes, and that's it. That's all they did. And I think with British television, with a lot of other TV shows, countries, excuse me, they realize like we have a beginning, middle, and end. Let's tell a story. Let's move on. There's other things that we can do. When I think about American shows, the number one show I always think about is The Simpsons. And The Simpsons is a show that's like it's still on, right? And we're like, how many?
Yeah.
40 seasons deep at this point.
Oh,
like,
it's close to 40, I guess.
I mean,
right?
what the fuck could you possibly have to talk about? Like, at what point does the episodes lose like meaning and value and quality because you keep pumping it out. Like there's a time when you need to stop things. And that's okay because we as consumers now have unlimited resources to get media and watch whatever we want over and over and over and over and over. So we can live within that. But I think, yeah, American sitcoms in particular just don't know when to shut it down. And I always applaud shows like the Greg Daniels shows, like in The Office when Michael leaves. I can remember that was like a huge moment in like the zeitgeist of American sitcoms that they were having this character who was the show leave the show. And that's obviously Steve Carell choice, it's a big part of it. But I just think that's something that American sitcoms just don't really do, or they haven't done in a long time. When you look at like the shows in front of a live studio audience, like your CBS shows, sweet fucking Christ! I mean, those things go on 10, 11, 15 seasons. What are you doing? What the fuck can you still be talking about? It's so fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's funny. Carell's spoken about this. I didn't know this until recently. Apparently, he wanted to do more, but NBC did not extend him a contract. At least that's
Wow.
what he has suggested. I think either he has suggested it or someone affiliated with the show. But regardless, I but even a show like The Office, I mean, I can't speak to how everyone feels about late seasons of that show. But again, I think part of and again, I mentioned this earlier, right? Jumping the shark. I mean, it's this way of describing when a show makes a narrative or character decision that I suppose produces this effect where it's just no longer the show it was. And I mean, I think the way that I think this episode wants us to think about that is it removes a central conflict or a set of conflicts to the point that the show is now rudderless in its attempt to find conflicts to perpetuate stories. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I think it's interesting how shows like Community, they sustain that really series long conflict regarding Jeff and Annie and their romantic feelings for one another. And that's such a key conflict to this show. And I think even shows like Parks and Recreation where I mean maybe there was some indication or suggestion that characters like Leslie and Ron, but like that then develops into something more of a non-romantic friendship. But I think even like sustaining the idea that, and it's not a radical idea, but I think it feels like a radical idea to a lot of people, the idea that a man and a woman can just be incredibly close friends with one another without it being romantic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They sustain, again, something that should not be a conflict, but I think feels like a conflict to a lot of people, regrettably. But when I look at a show like The Office, you know, deciding to couple Jim and Pam, I mean, that was, I don't think they fully understood. I think that's a moment where they removed a central conflict from this show. And you can actually see them after they
It gets so bad.
do that,
Yeah.
you can see them like searching for potential conflicts in that relationship that simply do not work, right? Whether it's Pam in college, or I think there's this suggestion in later seasons that Pam and one of the cameramen have maybe a quasi like crush
It's so
romantic
cringy and
thing.
bad, and yeah.
Yeah. Because again, like what they did, they jumped the shark. But again, I think this episode would almost encourage us to think they just removed a central conflict from the show. And I feel, I want to argue, at least my thesis statement is, this is what far too much American television does. In its need to improve, to make things better for characters and situations within shows, the result or the consequence of that is the removal of necessary, important, and maybe foundational conflicts. And what I like about Community so much is it almost wants to refuse to do that. This sense that Greendale will be anything but a precarious place, they never remove that conflict. And I think this episode effectively bears witness to that. Even when they think they have eradicated a conflict, it was really just a Trojan horse, right? Like for an even deeper conflict that grows out of that foundational conflict for this show, which is Greendale is a precarious place for losers and the dispossessed. And I just dig that a lot.
Yeah, no, that's I fully hop on that. I could not have said that more eloquently. I think that's a very good thesis statement. It reminds me a lot of, as you were saying, I was thinking of in Seinfeld. There's this moment at the finale where they think they're going to die in a plane crash, and Elaine is about to tell Jerry she loves him. Like, and
we think that
the whole episode you're just waiting, the whole season, like the whole show, you've been waiting for. And of course, Jerry, because it's Seinfeld, he does that same thing. If you tell me this, then so much has not mattered in the past. So things keep popping up, so I don't have to hear you say this only maybe one sentimental thing that's ever been done in this show. Yeah. And I really like that. I think that's, when you think about that against this episode of Community, I see that sort of in the same light now, I think.
Yeah, I was actually, John, that's beautiful, because that's the comparison I was thinking about as well, right? Where they, like, Seinfeld gets so close to removing what is this conflict of just perpetual fascination, this quasi-romantic, erotic affection that Elaine and Jerry have. But I think you could argue, even though I agree with many people that the quality of Seinfeld episodes in those final seasons are not as strong, they have the stones to not remove that conflict, because that's the show works. One of the foundational conflicts for that show is that tension between the two of them. So
yeah, because if you take that out, it's fundamentally different. And if you take out,
it's just boring.
If you take out Greendale, like if the series finale was them not at Greendale, it would be like the worst finale in the history of a show. It's like, who cares anymore? Like, this is where we'll been.
Talk about. I mean, I'm curious to see what you'll think of season 6 then, because I think the way the show explores space is super interesting, but we'll get to that. And by space, I just mean like actual, like,
not like Elon Musk, like sort of outer space. Remember when he put a car in space for no reason? Isn't that fucking awesome, dude?
They actually tried to build a SpaceX in Greendale in season 6. So no,
it's probably runs about as good as Elon Musk's Teslas.
I was about to say, like actually, I think back to the Kentucky Fried Chicken simulator, and like, that's what I think. Like, if Elon did not have his engineers, that's what he would produce.
What a sack of shit. Yeah, really quickly, I think you hit on some like high notes for me.
Sure.
Chang is, I don't know what's happening with this man.
His final betrayal. Yeah.
I guess he's a subway spy, but he's very bad at it.
I guess is the implication. Yeah.
And either he's illiterate or he's lost his fucking mind, because at the end he overhears the secret meeting and he writes the word tomato. Maybe that's like code for subway employees. The guys who the owners of the board guys from Greendale,
the school board guys.
Those guys are fucking great. Yeah. Those dudes are so funny.
Really funny.
The little Abbott and Costello routine they have about who to sell the, and then the one guy's like, "How about Ben and Jerry's?" And he's like, "Oh, you don't need that."
Yeah,
that's a great
really
joke.
Good.
That's a really good joke.
I don't know this actor's name, but the appraiser. I love him so much. His weird speech
Michael McDonald. Yeah,
dude. Can I read it for you? It's
so good. Please do.
The city of Greendale has sent me here to assess this campus's level of liability. Now, what do I mean by liability? Well, the city defines liability as any asserted or non-asserted perturbation by any qualifying party. What's a party? A party is a person or a group of persons or an event celebrating a person or a party, a person's birth, marriage. And then we get a cut to Shirley and Jeff talking, but it comes back to him. And then he says, but the city defines a dog as any living entity with 4 legs and a tail. So raccoons, bears, mountain lions, mice, these are all just different sizes of dog. What do I mean by size? I'll tell you a story. And then it cuts again and it comes back to him and he says, 40 400,000 gallons of liquefied horse meat. Here I come. And you shall find the salt is the taste of another man's bread, and hard is the way up and down another man's stairs. Dante, let's proceed.
The moment when he says 6 people die by being crushed by vending machines, and 5 of them are insurance adjusters. It's
Appraisers, yeah.
The funniest fucking thing. And then when Dean's grabbing it, screaming, "Let me be one of the 6."
Let me be one of the 6. God, the way he's flailing about, he looks like Jim Carrey. Like this feels like a Jim Carrey routine.
So good. Michael McDonald, the guy who played the appraiser, he's a Mad TV alum. He's
he is.
He's Stewart. Everybody knows him as Stewart. His whole thing was
really funny.
I'm an adult baby, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, Mad TV was a wild fucking show.
It was pretty wild. Jim Carrey was on. No,
he was on In Living Color. In Living Color, yeah.
Sorry. That Rocky sketch is always one of my favorites.
One of my favorite Mad TV sketches is when they do Forrest Gump and Pulp Fiction. They do Gump Fiction.
I haven't seen this.
And it's Forrest and Bubba as Jules and Vincent, and it's wildly good. I highly recommend you search it out. Gump Fiction.
Have you seen the Rocky where Jim Carrey's Stallone?
Yes, he's amazing. Yeah. Jim Carrey is a treasure, and we should do a whole Jim Carrey podcast. I love the man so much. I told you
I was feeling quite under the weather this past Sunday, and John, I watched a lot of movies. One of them was Liar Liar.
Oh, it's a classic.
He's so good.
When he's in the elevator talking about this woman's breasts, dude, I can't. It's still the funniest fucking thing I have ever seen in my life. It makes me laugh so much. And when he also keeps writing with the pen, and he's talking about the pen is blue, I can't. It's just so good. It's so good.
And he has this, like, and I mean, this is not an original idea, but that moment in court when he shouts, "I hold myself in contempt."
Yeah.
He's so good in that moment. I mean, it's one of those moments where, because this is like what I think the 2 Ace Ventura movies and then Liar Liar, and it's one of the first times I think someone allowed him to be serious. Like, he's big in this movie, but he has this one, well, he has several of these little serious moments. And that moment when he shouts, "I hold myself in contempt," he's so good there. And then, like, watching his later dramatic roles and thinking, of course, how could we have thought he wasn't this spectacular? Because he has this lovely little scene in Liar Liar.
Didn't he have like a year where he made the first Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber? That was like a 3-movie run that he did.
Yeah, I don't know if it was in the same year, but I think people forget this. Batman Returns or Batman Forever was pretty early as well.
Batman Forever, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
He had like 5 or 6 films just in a row that were just unmitigated bangers.
They
like,
were.
He just won.
When he talks out his butt cheeks in Ace Ventura, classic. 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
Anyway.
One final thing, John. The way the camera follows Abed in this episode, I left a comment about this in our shared Google Doc. The camera is fascinating to me in this episode because it almost feels frenetic. Like this moment when Abed declares there's no story, the camera just starts doing a lot of weird things. Like it does that quick pan to focus on that guy eating chicken noodle soup.
Oh yeah, that's great.
And I mean, the camera, it's as if the camera is and I think this is maybe part of the reason why you mentioned this earlier, the episode feels so desperate. I think it's because the camera in the Abed narrative, you can feel the desperation in its movement. And I think that's fascinating as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, sure. You've made me like this episode a little bit more.
Well, that's always
maybe
goal.
A little bit.
So, yeah.
Maybe a little bit.
Well, there's an Abed Gabed moment, which is also weird.
Is that the Abed with the beard?
Yeah, Gabed. Yeah.
His name's Gabed?
That's what I call him. I call him Gabed.
Okay.
It's God Abed.
I understand.
Would you call him Odd? That doesn't work.
No. Gabed works fine anyway. I don't have much else to say. That is our conversation for Season 5, Episode 12. At this point they think series finale, Part 1. Basic story, Colin.
Mm-hmm. John.
Who makes the Dean's List for you? Who's your best performance?
I think mine's Abed for this episode. I like him a lot in his narrative. I think he's really funny and really interesting. Again, maybe too conceptually ambitious to be good, but interesting nonetheless. John, what about you?
I got to go with Dean Pelton. He is, he's perfectly morose and insane, and I love him. And he's neurotic and screams and cries. And the moment when they open the door to the office and he's on his knees in his underwear crying is top notch. Chef's kiss. So good. That's for me, Colin. Let's move on. Check the syllabus, Colin.
Yeah.
Throw it at me.
I think it's probably, and in the show, I mean, Britta speaks to this, or maybe it's Annie. The inevitable Chang betrayal is maybe one of my favorite callbacks or like intertextual references. The idea that, of course, in this moment when Chang could improve his situation by switching sides, he does that, and he has this like weird, unbelievably funny mocking song he sings.
He sings the $5 footlong song from the Subway commercials.
Okay, see, I didn't know that. I didn't know. Yeah, I guess it's just the way he performs it. It doesn't sound like that song at all. So, John, what about you?
Mine's Jared Fogle. I love that guy from Subway. Nothing bad's ever happened with him. When I watched it and he popped up, my first thought was they took down the Dungeons and Dragons episode.
They kept the Jared
episode. Yeah. They kept the Jared episode.
Sure.
Boy, oh boy, Hachi Machi. I don't actually know if I have one. I like yours a lot. The inevitable Chang betrayal, which is Chang is so dumb in this. He's great. He's just so good.
John, do you have any best lines?
I don't. I do like that Hickey might be Duncan's uncle, I think that's one of my favorite. Yeah. Duncan's very funny in this too. He only has a couple moments, but when he talks about Twitter and he says, I have 48 followers because of my atheistic rants and pictures of food. That's just like that's so good. Anyway, go hit me with yours. What do you got?
He's in the next episode a lot. He's really funny.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. Good.
I don't like Abed's problem with our lack of problem. That's a Shirlene line. School board, baby. School board guys coming in. I feel like they should be like perpetually on the Joe Rogan Experience. That's controlled software for some kind of irrigation equipment. It's fun.
That's a wild thing. That's a wild moment.
This is a Hickey line. I've seen insurance appraisers bleed. Blood's different. Darker. It's so weird. Britta's, I wrote a paper on those dogs, and then it's just like a silence.
That's so wild. That was so funny.
She had huge fingers for a woman, part of what killed her. That's a Dean line. Wait. Press stop on Dave Matthews. That's a Hickey line. Also, Dave Matthews is back. That's wonderful. Here it is, dude. The Chang thing. Screw you guys. It's time to get paid. $5 foot long. Any.
Yeah. That's so good.
Oh, dude. Well, bread is a substance. What do you call the units of bread you use? Breads. Fantastic. And then finally, mine was missing a thumb. That was the Hickey line about the woman he slept with.
I do have my favorite line, and I don't know why you didn't say it. It's a Hickey line. It's the second time that Starburn starts up Dave Matthews. And he says, if you don't turn that down, there's going to be 2 hits. Me hitting you twice, which is so good.
Is that so Dancing Nancy's? Is that the name of that Dave Matthews Band song?
No, that's Ants Marching. Ants Marching.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's a banger of a tune by David Matthews.
It's a banger by David Matthews. John, that is our conversation for Season 5, Episode 12, Basic Story. John Phelps, we have a Patreon page.
Oh my God, we do. We have a Patreon page. Apparently, you can hop on there for free and get a tease
Nothing.
of what you could be getting. For
Yeah.
$3 a month, you get all the exclusive content. For $7 a month, you get a sticker and all the exclusive content, and you could become a producer of the Hop-Ons podcast. In every episode, we talk about how much we appreciate you. Above that, $15, you get a T-shirt, a sticker, a producer. Above that, I don't know. What do you want? You want to go Subway? I don't like Subway. Jimmy John's, I'm down. Jersey Mike's, probably. I think Jimmy John's is a bit of a MAGA rat nest, so maybe we don't go to Jimmy John's, but Jersey Mike's all day, all day. Let's go there, me and you and Colin, and have a sandwich. Colin, do you like sandwiches?
Well, a lot of them just have a lot of deli meat on them. So as a vegetarian,
You could have a veggie delight from Subway. It's a wonderful restaurant.
It sure is. Yeah, no, I don't I don't know if it's I think it is Jersey Mike's. They do some interesting like peppers, mushroom, like
They
cheese.
do like a portobello mushroom thing.
Yeah. I've
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
had that one before. It's pretty solid. Greg gets really excited when we go. It's a whole experience for him. So
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
You're a cheese eater, right?
I do eat a bit of cheese. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know you eat eggs. You're like Eggman basically.
Yeah, I really like eggs. So
How many eggs we go through a week, Colin? I want to know.
I'm
Give me
eating
numbers.
fewer. I'm eating fewer these days.
Oh, in your heyday though, what are we talking like 2 cartons
Oh.
of eggs?
3, 4.
3 dozen eggs a week?
Yeah.
Colin, you go turn into a chicken, buddy.
Yeah. So,
McGirt.
John, we would like to thank our producers for paying for my eggs. Thank you to Katana, Crindy, Rachel, Kate, Daniel, Lars, Rob, Robin, Jeff, and Andrew. And John is right. It's the first link in the show notes. John Phelps, the second link in the show notes is to our Threadless page. If anyone would like Hop-Ons podcast merchandise. And John, if someone were so inclined as to rate and review this podcast, what would you say? What would I say?
Well, it would be very fucking good, so we could read it here on the air. Ratings and reviews help the show get noticed. I started out with a lot of intensity. I did not want to finish it up there. But if you do rate and review the show, please let us know so we can read it here on the show if you want us to. If not, we used to have a safe word was banana hammock. That's probably changed since then. But just let us know. We don't want to embarrass anybody. If you're like out there saying how wonderful we are, we don't want to. I mean, man, I want to read that on the air, you know. Colin,
John.
as the crow flies next week, I will be on vacation. I hope everyone has a lovely. I know they won't hear this until after
your.
But I'm just saying, I will be on vacation, so everyone have posts. I hope everyone had a great Halloween, is what I'll say, because I'll be in Orlando, Florida, celebrating with our Lord and Savior Mickey Mouse. So should be a good time.
Oh, is that where you're going?
I'm going to your favorite place on earth. Yes, Disney World.
Oh God. Well, enjoy it.
You want to go? You want to come with me?
No, I do not.
He loves.
Is Melanie
it there.
coming?
Yes.
I didn't know she liked.
I'm just going by myself. It's just me. I'm going. I'm taking a trip there. Yes, of course she's coming. Yes.
I didn't know. It could have, like, you and Rob could have, listener, patron, maybe the two of you planned a trip. So
I have gone to Disney World with Rob before. It was a fantastic time.
I think we've spoken about it.
You should come though. You should come with me.
I can't.
Just one time.
For so many reasons.
Would you look mad on every ride? You would look so upset on every ride.
Actually, everyone, yeah. Even if the wind's blowing in my face, I would just have a scowl looking right at the camera. Yeah.
Anyway.
No, like, okay, quickly. We have a second. It's fine.
Sure.
I like roller coasters. I like rides. I think part of it, John, is just I don't like being hot. So Florida, no good. I think part of it as well is just like all of the people. Like if you and I, if we could just go with no one else there, which is not a thing that can happen, I would probably like it. I like roller coasters. It's not the rides. I want to be clear. I love rides.
It's the people and I get it. I'm not looking forward to the fucking heat, but you know, maybe I'll get COVID. We'll see if Florida hits me with that. So
Yeah, but I mean, I want you to have a good time because I know how much you like it. Like the fact that I don't like it is not a reason for you to not have a good time.
I'm going to get absolutely hammered. So if you're not following me like on Blue Sky, please do, because I'll probably be drunk blue skying. What do you say? Posting, tweeting. Can we say tweeting now since he doesn't even call it fucking Twitter anymore?
I guess. I mean, does Blue Sky have a mobile app?
What? Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. I should. Oh, okay. I should get that.
Anyway, for the Hop-Ons podcast.
I've been using my desktop. How old am I?
Okay, Colin's an old man. For the Hop-Ons podcast, thank you for listening. My name is John Phelps.
My name is Colin Cox. Find me on the Blue Skies. Bye.